On today's Celebrity Brides Unveiled, we find out whether Carol Decker had China on her wedding list.
No, I did not have China on my wedding list. Very funny.
Then, Toyah Wilcox talks sex, drugs and rock and roll mans.
The very first time I met him was 1983, where we shared a taxi to an award ceremony together. And he sat on the front seat and I was on the back seat with my manager, our manager. And he was very quiet and he had these little round glasses, and I just took the mickey out of him from the King's Road to the Grosvenor Hotel, which was about a half-an-hour trip.
My first crush, I was about 9, and it was a classmate. His name was David Wilcox. And I thought he was absolutely gorgeous. He probably still is. He had blonde hair and blue eyes and tanned really easily. And I think we had a snog. There was a dip in the playing field at my junior school, St Patrick's, and I think we had a bit of a fumble at 9, but didn't go any further. Well, my first serious boyfriend, who I'm still in touch with, we've lost touch and regained touch over the years, is Martin Chambers, and he lived in Shrewsbury, because although I'm from Liverpool, I was raised in Shropshire, and he looked just like Les McEwen from the Bay City Rollers. Now, if you're my age or thereabouts and you remember the Rollers, Les McEwen was to die for. Oh, that haircut, the tartan, it was wonderful. And Martin really looked like him, and of course girls threw themselves at him because he was good looking, and it was the closest they were going to get to being with a pop star, I suppose, somebody who looked like a pop star. And yeah, he was my first serious boyfriend. He took my cherry, he broke my heart, but I've forgiven him. When I got into the pop industry, I was positively geriatric. I was 22 when I started singing. I worked hard in local bands and sent my tapes away, and eventually got a record deal at 26. So I needed a Zimmer frame, which made me 30 when China on Your Hand was at #1. So I always looked very young, though. I always looked about 25 when I was 30, so we got away with it. And yeah, I did get a lot of attention from men and women. I did. A lot of the ladies liked me. Some obviously there was a sexual bias to it. A lot of girls liked me as a kind of best friend / big sister. And a lot of men liked me too, but I was the kind of woman, I'm not threateningly good looking. So I had and still have women come up to me and bring their husbands along and say, he loves you, but they're not kind of like, they don't want to scratch my eyes out, and they're not threatened by it. They sort of think it's really nice. So I've got that kind of big sistery attractive thing, I think. When I was into POW, I was very lucky in being able to maintain my relationship, because Ronnie Rogers was my boyfriend and my co-writer and my colleague, and we were together for 13 years, great years. I think at the end, possibly working and living together took its toll eventually, but I have to say we did actually outlast most of the other band members and many of our friends who were married. Who sort of split up around 7 or 8 years, and we lived together very happily for about 11, and then I suppose the last 2 years were a little bit tough. We ran out of steam, I think, is the best way of putting it. So I think you have to be careful when you live and work together. And then, of course, in 1991, the band came to an end. We'd had our time. It was all over. And as the band disintegrated, so did Ronnie and I, which was interesting. So while that was strong, we were strong. And we were very much in love, very close, but when it all fell apart, we did too, and that was a tough time for both of us. We both needed to find our feet after that, re-establish ourselves as individuals, not, you know, we were everything to each other. We've been together since we were in our early 20s. We were lovers, best friends, colleagues, you know, so it was a whole big mishy-mashy ball of string. It was really hard to disentangle yourself and become your own person. But when the dust had settled, he found a lovely partner, and they have children, and I have my partner and children, and now we've come back together as great friends, and it's all a bit trendy, actually. We all hang out and get along. I lived in central London for many years, and there was a great pub that opened up at the end of my street, and Richard came along, and he had his own restaurant in Primrose Hill, and all the Primrose Hillbillies came to sniff around the sort of this competition, this area that was cropping up. And he had a friend called Will who was in music management, and he and I got chatting, and I didn't have a manager at the time, so Will then began to manage me. And then one day, Will came up to the pub on his own, and we had supper. And I said, "Oh, where's Richard?" Because they sort of were like Laurel and Hardy, they went everywhere together. And he said, "Oh, he's working, I don't know, he's got a late shift on or something." And I was like, And suddenly I couldn't think of anything to say or a reason to be there, and Will was suddenly very boring, and I thought, oh my God, I've got a crush. But I thought, this is great, because I was feeling something again after pushing 4 years of not feeling anything for anybody, because that's just where I was in my life. It was a bit of a low point, you know. And I thought, I've got a crush. And I started getting the flutterbys when he came into a room and stuff like that, and he smelled nice, and you know, I sort of like would lean over to get my drink and sniff his neck and things, and I think it was the pheromones, hormones connecting. I believe in all that, yeah. So it took me 3 weeks to get him into bed though. He was really slow. We had been engaged for quite a few years. Richard had absolutely gone down on one knee and asked me to marry him on a Santa Monica pier in California when Scarlett was about 3, and handed me my sparkler, and it was absolutely lovely, and we were both very emotional and everything. But then you get on with day-to-day life, and actually getting around to getting married just didn't seem to bother us. So we probably were engaged for about 5 years. So here I am. This is my lovely dress, which I found in Debenhams, strolling through, and I just wore for a laugh because I knew that most of my friends wouldn't think that I would wear anything so ladylike. And if you look down here, I haven't had it cleaned, and here's all the lobster sauce. I must get it dry cleaned, actually. Got my dress off the peg from Debenhams. I wasn't looking for a dress. I went with a girlfriend. I was going to get a white sort of Julie Christie's 60s sort of trouser suit, you know, and we saw these wedding dresses, and she said, go on, try one on. And I tried one on, and it looked beautiful on me, and she went, Carol, you look beautiful. And I thought, I'm going to surprise everybody, I'm going to wear a bloody frock, because they would all have expected me to be in like cowboy boots and a hat or something, you know. And it's a very simple cream, off the shoulder, lovely wedding dress. It cost me 120 quid, and I looked at $1 million, and you know, but I am a bargain Betty. If I can cheat, I will, always. The big day comes, and it's the first sunny day in weeks of rain, so we're very relieved. We're up at 6 o'clock in the morning. My friend's arriving from London, who runs restaurants in London. His gift to us is a cocktail bar, a waitress, and the best bartender and cocktail maker in the world. So that was our wedding present from him. So we had mojitos, margaritas, yeah, it was fantastic. Loads of champagne, and that is such a fantastic gift to have somebody give you a waitress. So we, you know, as I say, we had all the trimmings, it was looking good. We get down to the registry office, we get married at 11 o'clock, and my best friend Jenny flies over from LA with her family. The drummer from Tapau, Tim Burgess, he flies from Toronto, which is fantastic. Ronnie comes, my ex, because I wanted him to see, look, I got another boyfriend. Little Tisha had dumped me. Somebody else wanted me. All of my old friends and immediate family only. I didn't do lots of cousins and aunts and uncles, and I did upset a couple of them. But again, we wanted to keep it. It was 80 people. And so we all came back up here at 11 o'clock. We were greeted with champagne. We've got the cocktails going on. Lee, our chef, has got the barbecue going. The lobsters are cooking, the steak's on. Pool was open. I told everyone to bring their costumes. Richard's dad gave a small speech because his brother is a serving army officer and was in Iraq at the time. So there was a speech from Dudley and a telegram from James, you know, sorry he couldn't be with us. And then it was very informal. That was it. Raise your glasses, thanks for being with us. And it was complete. I didn't give a speech, Richard didn't. We all chilled out. And after a couple of hours, everybody was in the pool. And we partied till about 1 o'clock in the morning. We had all the lights on outside. And it was just fantastic. And a lot of my friends are musicians, so they were playing the guitars and the piano that I have. We didn't go showbiz. I did have a PR person saying, do you want me to call OK Magazine? And a lot of the reason people do this is not just because they're media hungry. They get their wedding paid for, you know. So, but I didn't want to do that because it gets taken out of your control, and it was intimate and the best day. And considering I was a girl who couldn't care less whether she got married, I was so happy. The best part in the ceremony, which was brief, our children handed us our rings. So I would highly recommend waiting till you've had your children to get married, because to have them involved in the ceremony is so moving, just so moving. I was so proud of them. My secret to my successful marriage probably is the only thing that I could comment on, but I would say that you have to be friends first and foremost. I mean, all of these things sound like a cliche when you say them out loud, but Richard is my friend and I have an enormous amount of love and respect for him. If you don't respect each other, I think you're on a hiding to nothing. And there are times when we argue and we go through phases of being closer than other times. When he gets really busy, because he runs his own business, he can get in a groove and I'm sort of going, hello, I'm over here. And I'm the same when I've got a lot of gigs on and shows, or I'm very much involved with the children. He can feel very sidelined, and you have to then, it's true, make time for each other, have a date, you know, say, right, Thursday, you and me are going out and we're going to get drunk and do terrible things to each other when we get home. And you've got to make provision for that. Otherwise, it's very easy, especially when you have a family, to get suckered into all the chores and bits and bobs that you have to do. But he's my mate. That's why I think we're still doing well, because he's my friend.
Still to come.
That evening and the next day we were hounded. We were chased everywhere by journalists in cars, and eventually we drove off to a Franciscan retreat in Sancreed in Cornwall, who hid us, and we hid there for a week. When I was a little girl, I never dreamt about my wedding. I was a tomboy. All I ever wanted for Christmas and for my birthdays was punch bowls, guns, tanks. So weddings just weren't on my agenda at all. In fact, I probably, as I got older and got into my teens and became a punk rocker and then got into my 20s, was quite phobic about the thought of marriage and quite phobic about the thought of having a permanent partner and having a family. So when I did eventually get married, I shocked everybody I knew. I grew up in Birmingham, which was quite a difficult place for a girl to grow up 35 years ago. Women were forced into relationships, and I felt forced into being sexually active, and an awful lot of the girls that I knew were, their ideal was to have a child out of wedlock and get the security of a nice apartment and never get married and never get a job. And I hate to generalise about it, but that is the environment I grew up in. Because I grew up in that environment, I was ferociously against relationships. So I got involved in punk and in music around the age of 14. I knew that I was always going to be very different, started making my own clothes, starting to look very punky. I was very pre-punk. I was influenced by a film called The Rocky Horror Picture Show, which was pre-punk. So I was walking around Birmingham with peacock-coloured hair about 2 years before punk rock ever appeared. My husband and I should have met at least 5 to 6 years before we actually did, because we had the same management company. And the very first time I met him was 1983, where we shared a taxi to an awards ceremony together. And he sat on the front seat and I was on the back seat with my manager, our manager. And he was very quiet and he had these little round glasses, and I just took the mickey out of him from the King's Road to the Grosvenor Hotel, which was about a half-an-hour trip. And I can remember our manager just being flabbergasted that I had the guts to just provoke this man for half an hour, and I'd only just met him. I didn't know that he is in the top 10 of the world's most famous guitar players. He's a man called Robert Fripp, and at the 1983, he was just like God in the music world. He'd worked with David Bowie, he'd produced Peter Gabriel, he'd been on Blondie's albums, so he was a megastar. The picture behind me is of me and Princess Michael of Kent laughing at someone joking, and that someone is Robert Fripp, my husband. This is the first moment I really got to talk to him, because Princess Michael wanted a photograph taken with him and me. That picture appeared in a very famous newspaper the next day with Robert cut out of it, because Robert was never really a celebrity, but I was, and that was 1983, 3 years before I married Robert. So we didn't meet again until 2 years later, when we met at exactly the same awards ceremony, and he said to me, would I visit him at his home in Dorset and make an album with him, a charity album for a children's school in America? And I said yes. But what I didn't know, and this is very much how my husband works, when we met again in 1985, which would have been around June, July, he'd already said to his friends in America, where he lived in New York, he says, I'm wiping the diary clean for the next 3 weeks because I'm going to meet my wife. So he'd already had a kind of intuition about this. And then the following week, after we met and had this discussion, I went down to work with him on this album for a week, and he said, will you marry me? And I said, well, it's a bit quick, isn't it? And he said, no, I know you're my wife. I've been planning this for the last month. And I kind of went, okay, well, let's get to know each other. So I actually moved to Washington for 3 months to the school where we were raising the money for, where he taught, because he also teaches guitar. And I went there and taught drama for 3 months, and that was our courtship. I still have my wedding bouquet, which is hard to believe. This dear thing is 22 years old, and we keep it in our front room. It was yellow originally. I adore yellow flowers. So we had yellow roses, yellow carnations, and then lily of the valley. And this is probably the most expensive thing about the wedding, was the lily of the valley on May the 16th were already out of season. So we had to have them brought in from Holland, and it wasn't cheap. But I did a little drawing of what I wanted, and a friend went along to a florist and got it organised. And miraculously, we have managed to keep it. I organised the wedding. My husband didn't want anything to do with any of those traditions other than the church ceremony. So he participated in the rehearsal. We married in a church in Witchhampton, Dorset, where his father was buried, and I think his grandparents were buried. And we did the rehearsal, but that was about as far as it went. I bought the wedding rings, I bought the wedding dress, I cooked all the food for the wedding party. He didn't want children at the wedding, he didn't want any of my friends at the wedding, but I insisted on close family. Basically, I realised that it was nerves. He can't bear big events. I have never had a party since I've been married because he can't bear those kind of events. Which is unusual but bearable. So he didn't want music at the wedding. It was a silent wedding, and the extraordinary thing was, it was on May the 16th, 1986. It had rained for a month, and the moment we arrived at the church, the sun came out and streamed through the windows exactly where we stood at the altar. I had the veil made. My sister-in-law had to organise it, so no one knew I was having a wedding veil made. So that went over the front. It's very brittle and delicate now. You've got to remember, it's 22 years old. And this big flower went at the back. Now, these are back in again today. Back then, this was 1986, big things were in. But seriously, that went out in the 90s big time. But I suppose you would see that in Sex in the City today. We managed to have the reception with very close family, and then the press ascended. And the next day, that evening and the next day, we were hounded. We were chased everywhere by journalists in cars. And eventually we drove off to a Franciscan retreat in Sancreed in Cornwall, who hid us. And we hid there for a week, and they blessed our wedding. This is the garter I wore for something blue, and I wore it on my left leg, I think. I could be wrong, but there's only 2 legs to choose from. It was a gift from my husband's best friend. They had it made by a local lace maker in Dorchester, and my husband now keeps this on his desk in his office. Because Robert and I were getting married secretly, I couldn't order a wedding gown, and because I was paying for everything, and basically my husband was not interested in a huge expensive public wedding, I had to really ponder of how I was going to be a bride. I thought, okay, I'll just go and buy a ball gown, and it was really hard for me to shop at this time because I was incredibly well known. I couldn't go anywhere on my own. So I knew of a kind of debutante ball shop in a town called Wimborne in Dorset, and I went there pretending I was going to a ball, and I bought the only ball gown that would fit me, that was a little pink organza bo peep dress. I found my dress. It's pink. I didn't want a traditional white wedding dress, which was lucky. This is actually a little ball gown, very bo peep, off the shoulder, puffball sleeves that just rested on the upper arm, little kind of gatherings at the bottom. So it was very feminine, very pretty indeed. I think marriage is cyclical. I think everything in life is cyclical. You go through cycles, and if you can recognise those cycles, you can recognise when a cycle is dipping and you're in a bad time, and also when a cycle is lifting and you're in a good time. And I think you only grow to recognise these things if you have longevity in a relationship. So 7 years ago, we found the home we're in now, which is just the most perfect, beautiful home in the world in the Midlands. And we decided that, you know, we wanted to spend more time together and travel a little bit less, and, you know, just enjoy ourselves. We've worked really hard, not only as a couple, but as individuals as well. And you've got to bear in mind, we don't have children either. So, you know, we're not fixed, and we don't, you know, one of us isn't financially dependent on the other. But we go off, we have little honeymoons 3 or 4 times a year, and just lock the world out, and we're just romantic. And the one thing that both of us are, we are both very romantic. I love buying him gifts, and I love telling him to pack a bag, and you know, you're going to be in a warm climate, you'll be in a cold climate. Oh, don't worry, you're not going to leave the bedroom for a week. You know, I like surprising him and taking him on nice adventures.
Next time on Celebrity Brides Unveiled, Olympic winner Sally Gunnell talks about how her husband went the extra mile to win her heart.
John always says he probably paid for the Dartford Tunnel because he so many times going up and down and over that tunnel, and he used to get up at sort of stay the weekend and get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get back to Brighton to go to work and all these sorts of things.
Plus, the lovely Lucy Ruzetsky reveals how it was a case of love all with her tennis star husband, Greg.
I think very early on, Greg and I knew that it was serious, which is bizarre when you think I was only 15.